Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 744. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, Nikhil Nandagopal and I talk about building teams. Teams are the heart and soul of software development in all of its many aspects. Nikhil provides pragmatic advice for organizing people into teams. We also discuss the democratization of coding that low-code platforms deliver. Nikhil Nandagopal is a co-founder of Appsmith. He leads the development of the company's product, the first open-source low-code platform for developers. He is a software engineer and entrepreneur with 10 years of experience building apps. Link in the show notes to Nikhil's GitHub, his website, profile, and Twitter. Nikhil Nandagopal. Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom. It's really great to be here.
I am excited. This is going to be a fun conversation. Nikhil, before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's start, and I'd like to start with talking about teamwork. Let's sort of synchronize on our definition of teams. In sort of the workplace that we live in today, how do you define a team?
Okay, that's a great question. I think a team is a collective group of individuals that are focusing on a particular outcome, and I think that's what really defines a team. It's that focus that these collective individuals have and bring together to kind of achieve that outcome. And of course, teams can be of varying sizes. You can have teams of teams, in fact. But at least at Appsmith, what we try and do is we try to kind of ensure that the best teams are really kind of small, but and that's just because we want to really ensure that they have the right focus. And but I think the biggest challenge with teams, I think, is communication. In some sense or form. And I think that there's a point in time where the benefit of having more people as part of this team actually begins to outweigh the communication overhead, and or rather the communication overhead begins to outweigh the benefit, just because there's so much of management between these individuals to actually achieve that outcome. And I think so that's why we kind of define it as the few people who have to come together to really just achieve this outcome.
How did you come to the conclusion that there is probably a maximum team size?
I think some of it has been a bit of trial and error. We did initially we grew pretty quickly actually. I think just about maybe sometime in the beginning of last year we were probably just about 20-30 people, and today we're probably like 5x that. That's a huge growth spurt for a company to kind of go through. And I think in that time, what we noticed was that as our team size was kind of increasing, the amount of management overhead we had as founders and managers inside the company was also increasing. Then, interestingly enough, we also began to see a strange phenomenon where the output was actually not linearly increasing either, which was kind of strange to us. That hey, I mean, if we're growing, how come we aren't actually producing the proportionate amount of work? And we eventually began to realize that there was a lot of communication overhead between different teams. It could be in the form of simple decisions that need to be taken, where one team is kind of working on a part of the product that influences maybe another part of the product that another team owns. And you could see that there would be a bit of a decision paralysis between these two teams as to what the final decision or outcome would have to be. Or similarly, it could be that one team is trying to ship a particular project, but it has a dependency on another team. But unfortunately, that team doesn't have that dependency as part of their goals for that particular quarter, right? And as those kind of began to bubble up, I think we kind of started to look into organization design and how to kind of structure the org in such a way that the amount of communication across teams would be to a minimum, whereas within a team, it would be like really amplified. And this would empower really small teams to take on big goals and achieve them autonomously without needing too much input or too much dependency of another team inside the org. And that's where this entire idea of the team design came up. I think we were actually reading this book called Topologies of Organizations, and I think that gave us this a really good insight. Oh yeah, I mean that's the one. Yeah.
And I'm holding up Team Topologies, which is high on my to-do read list. So, what was one of the major changes that you made? I mean, you can see when you scale, whether it's a big company who's scaling up a big project, or especially a startup where the founders have that investment in where it's going. You made organizational changes, but what was one of the most potent ones that you ran across that you decided to do so that you could empower teams?
I'd probably say the one that we really decided to do was we actually sat everyone down and we took a good look at the product. So we actually really believe in Conway's law, which is your organization design end up reflecting your product design. So we actually did this exercise where we sat down with the entire team, which is quite small back then, and we looked at different parts of the product and we figured out what the fundamental building blocks of the product were and which building blocks needed to kind of interact with each other versus which really didn't need to interact. We identified which were the critical pillars, which were the ones that had a high amount of cohesion and needed and had influence over each other versus which didn't. And then once we were able to kind of break the product up into these different pillars and building blocks, we then began to just assign owners to different building blocks and talk about what the goals or the outcomes of these different building blocks really were. And as a team, when we came up with that that collective view or collective vision of this is what the product and this is what the org should thus look like. It became quite easy for us to just sort of break off into these different teams or departments that would own these different building blocks. I think that's what really helped us scale. To be honest, it was a bit of an experiment to begin with because we had never done it before. But it's been over a year now, and I think we honestly don't have any regrets about it. We've seen teams feeling more empowered because they had a specific area that they could really build upon, which means that they could also build a lot of domain knowledge in that one particular area of the product. This knowledge didn't need to be centralized anymore. It was actually a lot decent. In the beginning, it was everybody needed to know everything about the product, and that was pretty hard to scale. But now we could actually decentralize different parts of the product to different teams, and they could begin building a lot of great domain knowledge and become domain experts in different parts of the product. And because they became the domain experts, these teams could actually take autonomous decisions on their own without really needing to check in too much with the founders or with other teams. Because just because they were so focused on this one particular area, it gave them the most amount of information to actually make those decisions.
Wow, that's so cool. As you've scaled, so you did that when you were relatively small, you're now scaled. When do you think you're going to have to do that again?
The way we kind of think about this is we actually continuously keep doing it. And as we kind of keep staffing new teams and we see that certain teams kind of hit us our critical mass. As a heuristic, we look at something like if you're more than 10 people in a team, then something's generally going wrong because you can't really have a productive discussion if you have 12, 15 people in the room. Most of those people are probably just checked out during that discussion. At that point in time, we really relook at that product area and we have another conversation about, okay, in this product, how big is it? What are the different building blocks? What are the pillars? What are the parts we consistently invest in? What are the new initiatives? And then as a team, we again begin to create a shared understanding of what we believe, the different parts of this product are. And then we begin to assign create ownership areas within that sub team. And then those teams just split off and create teams of their own. So that's kind of the way that we think of it. Every now and then we just keep reevaluating these different product areas that tend to bloat, and we begin to kind of keep breaking them up. And we just keep kind of doing that over large periods of time. But I think eventually some of these different teams will also kind of come under an overall organization where you see that there is a decent amount of interdependency between these teams. Like our goal is obviously to lower the amount of dependency, but I think as you create more and more teams, there's a natural tendency for some dependency to exist. And the more number of teams you have, the more amount of dependency eventually gets created. And at that point in time, there will kind of have to be some sort of unifying factor. But hopefully that's still a couple of years down the line.
Well, or not. It would be really good to grow really, really fast. But yeah, it does have downsides. One of the things that when you were going through that process, that one of the words that struck me was the whole idea of trying to understand cohesion. Cohesion, I think that's an interesting topic in its own right. How did you determine cohesion between pieces of the code or the application? Was it just heuristically having a discussion, or did you use some sort of mathematical approach?
No, I think it was a bit more of a discussion-based approach, okay, because it wasn't so much as how much code was really in this area. It was more about how do we see the long-term vision of this part of the product evolving, and is this a part of the product that will evolve many times over a long periods, over a long period? And if so, then that means it requires consistent investment. What are the dependencies around this part of the product? If there aren't too many, then you kind of know that, hey, this is a big enough chunk for us to carve out and say that this is an ownership area and it has a clear goal that a team can own and kind of run with. If there are too many dependencies, then we try to increase the scope slightly until we see that, okay, there aren't too many dependencies for this particular part of the product, and now we can carve it out and give a team complete ownership over it. So it's more based on the product than the actual code design. In fact, the code design can always be refactored to kind of suit it. But what's really important is that that product area has a long-term vision that you can consistently invest in, and it's exciting enough for the engineers, for the designers, for the product owners inside that team to actually feel like, hey, I'm contributing to something that's really epic and that makes a meaningful difference.
How small is too small for a team?
It's hard to say, really. I think maybe like two or three are probably, maybe like 2 is too small. I would say with 3 is a pretty good team, to be honest. We've even seen teams of 3 just be able to spin up some great work. It's not, honestly, in the early days when 2 was a great team, but now I think with 2, at least in Appsmith, we just aren't able to create the same level of impact because I really believe that for a team to create impact, you just need a wide variety of good skill sets. You need product thinking, you need great engineering, you need like amazing design taste. Sometimes you even need awesome copywriting. And it's not to say that one person can't have multiple skills, but it's super unlikely that one person's going to have like who's going to be like really amazing at all 3, for example. So typically we are able to balance. Sometimes our engineers are really great at design as well. So we don't necessarily need a designer always, or sometimes our product owners are really great at copywriting, or engineers are great at product, so we don't need a product owner. So there is a good possibility of like just even 3 people coming together and creating something really stellar. And I think there's nothing wrong in that. But I think below that, with just 2 people, sometimes you're not able to go past the POC phase where you're able to create an MVP of a product, and that's nice. But you're not able to really get into production and also make it generate the kind of impact that you'd want to inside the company.
I think it would also be you tend to have sort of decision paralysis on occasion with 2 people. You need somebody to be able to break a tie. Teamwork, obviously, really critical to getting value to the market. In terms of how did you decide to spin a company up to do what Appsmith does? what was the genesis of that thought process? How did you and your how many founders are there in Appsmith?
Yeah, so it's three of us founders. It's me who leads the product. It's my co-founder Arpit who leads the tech part, and our other co-founder Abhishek, who is our CEO and leads all of our sales and marketing.
What's sort of the origin story, I guess?
Right, right. So interestingly enough, Arpit and I we worked together for a bit at a health tech company based out of India, and over there we got to see a whole variety of internal tools. I was heading the product for the food delivery vertical, and we grew like incredibly fast. We grew from about 100 meals a day to about like 50,000 meals a day within just a span of 2 years. And the only thing that really helped us scale in a business like food delivery was having stellar operations, because that was really key to the customer service and fulfillment of the entire value. And the only way to have stellar operations is by having stellar internal tools. Truly, that's really the crux of it. But honestly, I've always disliked working on internal tools. They aren't the most pleasant to use nor build. And I always found it really hard to create buy-in around how that we should improve these processes by shipping new internal tools or improving our existing internal tools. And I could also sympathize with the engineers who didn't really want to kind of work and build these tools, because I was an engineer myself at one point in time. In the pursuit of that, I kept thinking, why isn't there a better solution for this? And in fact, I've been at multiple places where almost every company does end up building some internal framework. Even at CureFit, we did have some internal framework, but it was really hard to build and maintain it. Or like it's the last thing that actually gets any engineering bandwidth. And that kind of got me thinking that there are internal frameworks that tend to solve this problem, but they aren't completely solving this problem because the maintenance of the internal framework is too big an overhead for a startup. Maybe a company like Facebook can, dedicate an entire team to actually building and maintaining a project like React or some other internal framework. But it's really difficult for a startup to do the same. And that's kind of when me and Arpit got talking. And we decided that it would be great if we could create like an internal framework for every developer out there, so that they could just build and spin up all the internal tools that they need without really having too many dependencies. And the other thing I think that really triggered us was that internal tools almost always built by the backend engineers. And backend engineers really dislike HTML, CSS. In fact, my co-founder Arpit is a backend engineer, and he has a bone to pick with every front end out there. And at the same time, there's definitely no designer that's going to touch an internal tool. And that got us thinking that software building is really hard. You need to have a whole variety of skill sets, which is why we need teams, right? You need to have back-end skill sets, you need to have front-end skill sets, you need to have DevOps skill sets to deploy it, you need to create UI UX design skill sets. And we were just wondering that why can't we simplify all of this? Why can't we make it really, really easy for a back-end developer to just easily spin up an internal tool? Because a lot of the tools today, when you look at it, are actually just a bunch of reusable building blocks. They're all unique in their own sense, but the fundamentals of all these tools are really, really the same. And that was where the genesis of Appsmith started, I think, when we realized that you just need to give developers the building blocks and allow them to configure those building blocks in a really simplistic manner. And that will kind of lead them to be able to build these internal tools without a lot of effort and not needing like a huge team to actually help build them.
So if things become building blocks, do we actually need developers anymore?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, if you think about it, right, developers ourselves, like we honestly hate rewriting things. Like that's why we really believe in don't repeat yourself. We love using packages and libraries and any kind of building block that's available to us. Development today is actually all about more and more layers of abstraction rather than less. I myself can't write in like assembly or some other super low level language. Those just simply aren't my skill sets. I'm privileged to be working on top of a great framework like React, and I just believe that Appsmith itself is also just another layer of abstraction. It's just another layer that makes it easier to work with the fundamentals, because a lot of the fun of development is really about translating business logic and complex workflows into applications. You don't want to be spending a lot of time working with simple configurations, basic UI that can easily be kind of templatized, or given to you out of the box. What developers really want to spend time on is defining how these workflows should actually work, and actually solving real world business problems. And I think that's where developers will always be needed. We're just making it a lot easier for more and more developers to kind of jump on the bandwagon.
So if more, again, I see this as sort of a democratization of development by going down this path. Is that something that resonates?
A little bit. I think the part that people get wrong about no code or low code today is they try and make everyone a developer when everyone really doesn't even want to be a developer a lot of the times, and that's where we look at it differently. We look at developers as an entire spectrum. There are developers who are extremely advanced, and there are developers who are sort of just getting started, right? And what Appsmith is really helping do is kind of move the developers that are just getting started much further ahead in the spectrum, so that they can actually unlock a lot more powers. Today, even junior developers who are just getting started with the basics of JavaScript can actually build full-fledged applications that talk to databases and APIs with almost no help or guidance from anyone else out there. And that's really incredible. And the more we keep pushing this barrier and lowering this barrier, we see that more and more people who are interested in app building are actually going to come into the fold and become developers themselves. So we don't look at it as a value proposition that, hey, every business owner out there or every customer support agent out there should start becoming a developer. Instead, we look at it as, hey, every developer out there, or everybody who has the aspiration to actually build something and develop something on their own, we should lower the barrier low enough so that they can actually get into this entire flow of app building and be able to create value to businesses and other users out there.
So how do you see this changing the organizations that buy into this structure and bring in tools like Appsmith?
I think in a couple of ways, we're doing some really unique stuff at Appsmith. One is we really believe in grounds up adoption. Appsmith is one of the few software that isn't actually sold top down. It's entirely grounds up adopted, and which is why it's open source. So developers anywhere can actually install Appsmith on their local machines or on their AWS EC2 instance and begin building applications on day one without having to get an approval from a manager or without having to go through a very complicated software audit process or a buying process. And that's really unique and critical, because Appsmith in this form is able to spread very quickly inside organizations and actually get into the hands of pretty much anybody and everybody. And because of this, what we're seeing is that there are more types of developers that are getting their hands on this software today, because they don't need the kind of approvals or the kind of gatekeeping that would happen before with software. So today, even sometimes if they see that a technical product manager, for example, is really good with APIs, and maybe they don't have a really good understanding of JavaScript, a lot of times the developers will just help them wire up small parts of the application, but the product managers actually go ahead and build a large part of the applications, just because they're able to quickly get their hands on it without too many layers of approval or too much gatekeeping over there. And in this sense, I think that what's really happening is that the entire software begins to spread to the creators in the organization. The creators are the ones who have the idea of a better organization, a better process, a better vision for how things are done, and they're itching to make change, but they can't today because they're currently limited by their own skill sets. They need an entire team, they need new budgets, But with Appsmith, we're actually able to unlock those creators inside these orgs. We're able to empower them and unlock them to actually create the change that they really want to see, and thus create a massive amount of value for the organization. And I think that's what's really changing today.
That sounds fantastic. It could also, I think, lead to a bit of anarchy, right? Where everybody is pushing change and there's no consistent vision. That suggests that regardless, I think that's probably a failure of whomever is providing the organizational vision, not necessarily the tool set. But that's it. Wow. Nikhil, this has been absolutely marvelous. If you woke up tomorrow morning and someone handed you your caffeinated beverage of choice, a magic wand with 2 wishes, and told you that you have the power to change any 2 things that impacted application development, what would those 2 things be and why?
Okay, I would probably say the first thing I would impact is I would get rid of syntax or create something that is extremely syntax agnostic. I think syntax is one of the biggest killers or rather one of the biggest barriers to actually application development today. There are too many different languages with too many different means of communication, and completely eliminating that, having either a unified language or some way where we can completely get rid of that will drastically improve application development. The other thing that I would do is probably somehow wave away performance. I think that's the second one that is absolutely brutal, because even if you get rid of syntax, if at the end of the day the instructions you input aren't very performant, your application is more or less going to be dead on arrival. And unfortunately, I think application development is really hard, and it's really hard to build applications that are extremely performant all the time. Today, a lot of times we over rely on the CPUs that we're given, but especially when you're working with just a browser on an end user's machine or even mobile phones, you don't have that luxury. And I think if somehow all apps could just be performant and not be syntax agnostic, app building would be like incredible. I think the number of applications, the quality of applications will just go up drastically.
Why don't, and I want to pull the string just a few seconds in terms of the performant piece. I've obviously been in the business for a while. My wife owned an app firm a few years ago, has sold it. But why is it sometimes a surprise to developers that the work that they've just done, the app that they've just created, isn't performant? What is it that we're not teaching them about testing that makes that something that they would know up front, or at least should find out up front?
Yeah, I think load is it's a very different mindset. And today we're taught to optimize for a variety of different things. You have to optimize for stability. You have to optimize for load in some cases. You need to optimize for great design and extensibility. And you have to also optimize, unfortunately, for deadlines, because you do have to meet your deadlines.
True. And budgets.
Yeah, and budgets. And I think within all of these optimizations, right? If you're optimizing for everything, you're really optimizing for nothing at all. And what typically happens, that at least that I've seen, is that when you over-index on a few things, developers don't tend to think too much about load and scale and what's going to happen if we have like 1 million users on the platform, because that's a tomorrow problem, honestly, right? When you're working on a new feature or a new product, you're still worried about the first 100, the first 1,000 users. And sometimes you tend to over-index on that and not really think about the tomorrow problem, which is, hey, what happens when there are going to be 1 million users on the platform? And I think unless you bring that in as a mindset from day one, that, hey, one day this platform will have like 1 million users, and are we thinking about every feature from that perspective? I think it's really hard to kind of achieve great performance for every single feature that comes out there. So it really starts from day one. What do you want your platform to really be optimized for?
Nikhil, how could people find out about you, find out about Appsmith, continue the conversation?
Well, they can always tweet me at Nikhil Nandagopal, or they can actually follow me on GitHub. So Appsmith is an open source project on GitHub. You can just head over there and give us a star and follow all of our latest releases. You can also check them out on appsmith.com.
At this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything you'd like. You've educated the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners. Yeah, the platform's yours for 2 to 3 minutes. Promote anything you'd like.
Thanks. I think Appsmith really does save a ton of engineering time, bandwidth, and also budget. And it's been a game changer for a lot of our users, whether it's small startups or really large companies. And what I really request everybody on the show is to check out our GitHub repo, give us a star, download the product and try it out, and also leave us some feedback if because we're always itching for new members of the community to tell us what we should improve in the product and how we can actually make Appsmith, give developers the best developer experience out there. So yeah, that's my spiel.
Thank you. And this has been absolutely fantastic. I hope we get a chance to talk again. Nikhil Nandagopal, thank you for being on the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks so much, Tom. It was really great speaking to you today.
In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 17 of Extraordinary Badass Agile Coaching. The journey from beginner to mastery and beyond is titled The Badass Agile Coach's Guide to Starting Your Day, which provides a structure or ritual for beginning each coaching day. I see this as a macro planning arc that Bob has recommended for all coaching sessions. Thinking about Christmas presents for your coaching friends? It's 302 days until Christmas. Buy a copy and beat the rush. Badass Agile Coaching, link in the show notes. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, I want to talk about one of the greatest enemies of change, fatalism. Phrases like, "that's not our culture," or "that won't work here," are discussion killers. We also have a visit from Tony Timble, who brings his To Tell a Story column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?